They walked him through the curtain like he didn't belong there. A 16-year-old black boy, sitting in first class, ticket valid, seat confirmed, backpack already in the overhead bin. He had flown that exact route 11 times. He knew that plane better than the crew standing in front of him. But none of that mattered, because a woman with a fixed smile looked at him for 4 seconds and made a decision that had nothing to do with his ticket. She called security. A man with a radio and a practiced walk showed up, put his hand on the boy's shoulder with the kind of force that wasn't necessary but was meant to be felt, and walked him all the way to the back, through the curtain, past the dividing line, into a seat too small for his luggage in a cabin that had no space left for what was already his. And the boy didn't fight it, didn't raise his voice, just sat down with his backpack on his lap and looked out the window. Because he had learned, the way too many people learn, that some rooms will make a decision about you before you open your mouth, and the cost of fighting that decision in the wrong moment is higher than the cost of waiting. But what they didn't know, what nobody on that plane knew, was who was about to walk through that gate. A Korean Mafia boss, the most dangerous kind of powerful, the kind that doesn't announce itself. And he wasn't just another passenger. That was his plane. And that boy sitting alone in row 14 was his son. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click Join to become a member and help our channel. The first thing you noticed about Theo Ryuk was that he didn't fidget. Most teenagers his age, 16, maybe 17, couldn't sit still for more than 3 minutes without pulling out a phone, adjusting a strap, tapping a knee. Theo just sat, backpack on his lap, thin silver chain catching the light from the oval window, eyes forward. Calm in the way that only comes from either having nothing to prove or having already proven everything that matters. He had flown this route 11 times in the last 2 years. He knew the sound the overhead compartment made when it didn't close properly. He knew the exact moment the cabin pressure shifted. He knew this plane the way a person knows a house they grew up in, not by studying it, but by living inside it long enough that the details stop being details and start being memory. He placed his backpack in the overhead bin, sat in seat 2A, and looked out the window. That was when Chloe noticed him. She didn't say anything at first. She moved through first class with the practiced ease of someone who had learned to make authority look like hospitality. Smile fixed, posture straight, eyes doing a different job than her mouth. She checked boarding passes. She offered champagne. She paused at row 2 longer than she paused anywhere else. There was no incident report, no complaint, no flag in the system. There was only a woman who had decided, in the space of 4 seconds and without a single piece of evidence, that something was wrong. She called Oliver. Oliver arrived the way men like Oliver always arrive. Slowly, so you feel the weight of his presence before he speaks. He was 52 years old and had spent the last decade believing that the badge on his chest was a form of truth. He stood at the end of row 2 and looked at Theo the way someone looks at a word they don't recognize. Not with curiosity, but with suspicion. "Son, I'm going to need you to come with me." Theo looked up. His expression didn't change. That, more than anything, seemed to unsettle Oliver. The absence of fear where Oliver had expected to find it. "Why?" "There's an inconsistency with your boarding documentation." There was no inconsistency. Theo knew it. Oliver knew it. Chloe, standing 3 feet away pretending to adjust a headrest, knew it too. But the word had been spoken, and in the world Oliver operated in, the spoken word was enough. Theo stood. He retrieved his backpack from the overhead bin with the quiet efficiency of someone who has learned that resistance in certain rooms costs more than compliance. He followed Oliver down the aisle, past the dividing curtain, past the boundary that separated the world of champagne and leather from the world of middle seats and recycled air, and sat down in row 14. The curtain closed behind him. Around him, the economy cabin continued its ordinary life. A woman adjusted her pillow. A man scrolled through his phone. A child pressed her face against the window. Nobody said anything. Not because they hadn't seen, but because they had. And they had made the same quiet calculation Theo had made. The one that says, "This is not a battle I can win in this room, in this moment, with these people watching." He put his backpack on his lap. He did not put his headphones on. He looked out the window at the tarmac and waited. Not with resignation, but with the particular stillness of someone who knows that the story is not over. Who understands, with a clarity that 16 years of living in borrowed spaces had given him, that the world has a way of correcting itself. Not always. Not fast enough. Not without cost. But sometimes, in the exact right moment, with the exact wrong person watching, it does. 30 minutes before the doors closed, the gate agent's voice came over the intercom. The last passenger had arrived. He walked the way men walk when they have never needed to announce themselves. No hurry. No performance. The kind of stillness that fills a room not because it demands attention, but because attention has no choice. Chaewon-ryuk moved through the gate corridor with his Italian leather briefcase held at his side and his eyes doing what they always did. Not looking at things, but reading them. The terminal, the gate agent, the plane, the distance between where he was and where he needed to be. He had built an empire on exactly that kind of reading. The ability to walk into a room and understand, before a single word was spoken, who held power and who only believed they did. It was not a skill he had been taught. It was something that had been carved into him over 30 years of making decisions that other men were too afraid to make, in rooms that other men were too afraid to enter. He stepped onto the aircraft. Chloe was waiting at the entrance with her fixed smile and her careful eyes. She began the sentence she had rehearsed for business class passengers. The one about the seat number and the champagne and the estimated departure. But she didn't finish it, because Chaewon had already stopped. His eyes moved through first class the way they always moved through any space he entered. Methodically, without urgency. Cataloging. 2 seconds. 3. The leather seats. The overhead bins. The champagne flutes catching the cabin light. The seat by the window, row 2, seat A. Empty. Something shifted in his face. Not much. The kind of shift that only exists for a fraction of a second before the discipline of a lifetime closes over it like water over a stone. But it was there. A tightening at the jaw. A stillness that became a different kind of stillness. Where is the boy who was sitting in seat 2A? Chloe blinked. I'm sorry? The boy. 16. Dark hoodie. Silver chain. He said it without looking at her. He was still looking at the empty seat. Where is he? There was a small issue with the boarding documentation. It's been resolved. He's been accommodated in... Where? The word landed like a door closing. Economy, sir. Chaewon was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then he held out his briefcase. Chloe took it without understanding why. He was already moving. He passed the dividing curtain without touching it. He walked through economy the way he had walked through every room in his life that was not built for him. Without apology, without adjustment, without the performance of belonging that most people feel compelled to give. Passengers looked up. Some looked away. Some didn't. It didn't matter. He wasn't reading the passengers. He was counting rows. Row 14. Theo was sitting with his backpack on his lap, looking out the window. He didn't hear Chaewon approach. Or maybe he did, and recognized the particular rhythm of those footsteps, the way you recognize a voice before you see the face. He turned. For a moment, neither of them spoke. There are relationships that don't require language to function, built not on blood, but on something quieter and more durable, on years of shared silences and parallel windows, and the kind of loyalty that doesn't announce itself because it has never needed to. This was one of those relationships. "Why are you sitting here?" "They moved me." Chaewon looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the seat, at the backpack on the boy's lap, at the overhead bin above him, already full with other people's luggage, no space left for what was his. He turned and walked back through the curtain. Chloe and Oliver were standing exactly where he had left them, with the particular stiffness of people who know something is about to happen, but have not yet accepted that they are the ones it is about to happen to. Chaewon reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a card. Not a business card, an institutional card, the kind that doesn't carry a name, only a number, because the people who need to know what it means already know. He placed it in Chloe's hand. "Call that number." She looked at the card. She looked at Oliver. Oliver's hand moved instinctively toward the radio on his belt, a reflex, the muscle memory of a man who had spent a decade believing that the radio was the final word in any conversation. "Sir, I'm going to need you to..." "Call the number." Oliver stopped. Something in the room had changed. Not the lighting, not the temperature. Something underneath those things. A frequency, a pressure. The particular atmosphere that gathers in a space when the person standing in it has stopped performing patience and started simply waiting. Chloe dialed. The phone rang twice. The call lasted 9 seconds. Chloe would remember that detail later. Not the words, not the voice on the other end, but the number. 9 seconds. She had expected an argument, a process, a supervisor who would ask her to hold, put her through to someone else, generate a ticket number. That was how authority worked in her experience. Slowly, through layers, with the comfort of bureaucracy absorbing the impact of any moment too large to face directly. Instead, 9 seconds. A voice that spoke 2 sentences. A click. She lowered the phone. The color left her face the way color leaves a room when the light source is removed. Not dramatically, not all at once, but completely, and in a way that could not be reversed. "The aircraft," she said. The words came out smaller than she intended. She cleared her throat. Tried again. "The aircraft belongs to him." Oliver didn't move. "The entire aircraft. The management company. The charter contract. She stopped. There was nothing more to say. She had said the thing, and the thing had landed. And now the three of them were standing in the wreckage of the 9 seconds it had taken for the entire architecture of her certainty to come down. Oliver took off his glasses. It was a small gesture. Unconscious, probably. But it was the most honest thing he had done since boarding the plane. Because men like Oliver use their glasses the way they use their uniforms and their radios and the practiced weight of their footsteps. As instruments of authority. As props in a performance. And when he took them off, standing there in the first-class cabin, with the card still in Chloe's hand, He was no longer performing anything. He was just a man who had made a mistake he could not undo. Chae-won watched them with the patience of someone who had already known how this would end before it began. He had known the moment he saw the empty seat. Had known before that, probably. In the way that men who have spent their lives reading rooms know when a room has already made its decision about them, and are simply waiting for the room to catch up to what they already understand. He did not raise his voice. That was the thing that Chloe would carry with her long after that day. Not the revelation, not the card, not the 9 seconds. The silence. The absolute, unshaking stillness of a man who had every right to fill that cabin with the full weight of what had just happened, and chose instead to let the silence do the work. When he finally spoke, he looked directly at Oliver. "You removed my son from his seat." It was not a question. It was not an accusation in the legal sense. No performance of outrage, no demand for apology, no theater of the wronged. It was something quieter than all of those things. A statement of fact delivered with the precision of a man who understood that the most devastating thing you can do to people who abused small power is to refuse to grant them the dignity of a dramatic confrontation. Oliver opened his mouth. Closed it. "You looked at a 16-year-old boy sitting in a seat he had every right to sit in," Chae-won continued. "And you decided, without documentation, without cause, without a single fact to support the decision, that he did not belong there." The cabin was silent. Not the polite silence of people pretending not to listen. The real silence. The kind that happens when everyone in a space has stopped whatever they were doing because what is happening in front of them has become the only thing that exists. And then you walked him through a curtain and sat him in a seat too small for his luggage and left him there. And you came back up here. And you poured champagne. Chloe's hand was trembling slightly. She was not aware of it yet. "I want you to understand something." Chae-won's voice did not rise. If anything, it dropped, became quieter, more precise, the way a blade becomes more dangerous the closer it gets to still. "Not because I need you to apologize, not because I want anything from you, but because you should carry this." He let that settle. "You didn't move him because of his ticket. You didn't move him because of documentation. You moved him because of what you saw when you looked at him. And what you saw, what made you pick up that radio, had nothing to do with anything he did." Oliver's jaw was tight. The radio was still on his belt. He did not reach for it. "My son has flown on this aircraft 17 times. He knows this plane better than you do. He knows the registration number. He knows the tail code. He knows the name of the engineer who serviced the left engine in February." A pause. "He knows because I told him. Because this is his plane as much as it is mine." He turned. Not dramatically. Not with the practiced exit of a man making a point. He simply turned. The way a person turns when the conversation is over because everything that needed to be said has been said, and walked back through the curtain. The economy cabin watched him pass in complete silence. He reached row 14. Theo was still sitting with his backpack on his lap, looking out the window. He turned when he heard the footsteps, looked up at Chae-won with an expression that was not surprise, not relief, not the collapse of someone who had been waiting to be rescued, just recognition. Chae-won reached down and took the backpack, held it at his side. "Come." Theo stood. They walked up the aisle together, through the curtain, past the dividing line, back into first class, and nobody said a word. Not Chloe, not Oliver, not the passengers in their leather seats with their champagne flutes and their careful eyes. Theo sat in 2A. Chae-won sat in 1A. The backpack went into the overhead bin, where it had always belonged. The aircraft doors closed at exactly the scheduled time. There was something almost indecent about that. The way the machinery of departure continued without acknowledgement, without pause, without any concession to the fact that something irreversible had just happened in that cabin. The seatbelt signs came on. The safety demonstration began. The engines found their low, building hum beneath the floor. Chloe stood at the front of the cabin and delivered the demonstration she had delivered 400 times before. The oxygen mask, the emergency exits, the brace position. And her hands did not shake, because her hands knew the routine, even when the rest of her did not. Oliver had taken a seat in the crew area. He had not spoken since the curtain. In seat 1A, Chae-won opened his briefcase. He removed a single document, reviewed it for approximately 90 seconds, and returned it to the case. Then he closed the case, placed it beneath the seat in front of him, and looked out the window as the plane began to move. His face was the same face it had been when he walked through the gate, the same face it had been when he read the empty seat, the same face it had been when he delivered every word of what he had said to Oliver and Chloe. Which was to say, it was not a face that announced anything. It was a face that simply existed, fully, without asking permission. In seat 2A, Theo watched the terminal slide past the window. He had not said much since they sat down. He didn't need to. There was a language that existed between them that had nothing to do with words, built over years of parallel silences, of sitting in different seats on the same plane, of growing up in the specific and unusual gravity of a man who said very little and meant all of it. Theo understood that language the way he understood the tail code and the engine maintenance schedule, not because he had studied it, because he had lived inside it long enough that it had become part of him. The plane lifted. Seoul fell away beneath them, the Han River catching the last of the afternoon light, the city spreading in every direction like something that had grown too large for any single frame to hold. Theo watched it until the clouds took it, and then he watched the clouds. After a while, without turning from the window, he spoke. "You didn't have to say all of that." Chae-won was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "I didn't. They're not going to change." "Probably not." Theo was quiet. The clouds moved beneath them, indifferent and enormous. Then why? Chae-won considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Not because the answer was complicated. He had known the answer before Theo finished asking, but because some answers deserve the weight of a real pause before they are given. "Because you were sitting in that seat with your backpack on your lap," he said, "and you weren't going to say anything. And I needed you to know that the silence wasn't yours to carry." Theo didn't respond immediately. Outside, the clouds broke for a moment, and the light came through flat and clean and enormous. The kind of light that only exists at altitude, above everything. "I knew you'd come," Theo said. "I know you did." "I wasn't scared." "I know that, too." Another silence. The comfortable kind. The kind that doesn't need to be filled because it is already full of everything the words would only approximate. Below them, invisible now beneath the cloud cover, the plane they were sitting in was registered to a holding company incorporated in Delaware, which was owned by a logistics group headquartered in Singapore, which traced back, through 4 layers of corporate structure, to a single name. The aircraft had 17 prior flights logged under the same registration. On 16 of those flights, Seat 2A had been occupied by a teenage boy with a dark hoodie and a silver chain, and the particular stillness of someone who had learned early that the world would make assumptions about him, and had decided, without bitterness, without performance, that the world's assumptions were the world's problem, not his. On the 17th flight, a woman with a fixed smile had decided, in 4 seconds and without evidence, that he did not belong in the seat he was sitting in. She had called a man with a radio. The man with the radio had walked a boy through a curtain, and then a man in a black suit had walked through the same curtain to bring him back. Not loudly, not dramatically, not with the performance of rescue or the theater of justice. Just a man who had seen an empty seat and understood, immediately and completely, what the empty seat meant, who had walked the length of an aircraft to stand in a row that was not built for him and say, without raising his voice, the only thing that needed to be said: "My son, my plane." 6 words. The kind of words that don't need volume because they carry their own weight, because they are not really about an aircraft or a seat or a boarding pass or a corporate registration in Delaware. They are about something older and simpler and more durable than any of those things. About the specific and non-negotiable truth that a child is a child before he is anything else the world decides to make him. That the space he occupies belongs to him, not because of who his father is or what his father owns, but because he sat down in it with a valid ticket and a silver chain and 11 flights worth of memory and every right in the world to be exactly where he was. The clouds closed beneath them. The light held. Theo put his headphones on, not because the conversation was over. It wasn't, not really. It never was between them. But because some moments are complete, and the right response to a complete moment is not more words. It is the quiet act of continuing, of sitting in your seat, of looking out the window at the sky that belongs to everyone and belongs to no one, and stretches in every direction without a curtain, without a dividing line, without anyone standing at the edge of it deciding who is allowed to cross. Below them, the world continued its ordinary life. Above it, in seat 2A, Theo Ryuk looked out the window and felt, for the first time since the curtain closed behind him, exactly like what he was. Home. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever walked into a room and felt the decision already made before you spoke a single word? Judged not by what you carried, but by what you looked like carrying it? Have you ever stayed silent, not because you had nothing to say, but because you understood, in that moment, that the silence was the only thing they couldn't take from you? And have you ever had someone walk through a curtain just to stand beside you? Not to make a scene, not to perform justice, but simply to make sure you knew that the silence was never yours to carry alone. Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, justice, and the kind of love that doesn't need to raise its voice, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click Join to become a part of our community and help the channel.